to succeed in benchmarking. Most of us have a lot of psychological baggage to discard before we can successfully learn from others. Perhaps the greatest is the fear of being seen as copying. From grammar school onward, we have been discouraged from working together and rewarded for individual achievement. Benchmarking is far more than copying. It requires deep self-assessment and the ability to translate practices that work in another context into a process appropriate to your own organization. It is the essence of creativity. Second, only to the fear of being seen as a copycat is the fear of losing competitive advantage by sharing information. Few organizations would or should share competitive or proprietary information with competitors or unauthorized others. But the realm of proprietary advantage is quite small. Those islands of competitive advantage are surrounded by oceans of opportunity in business and management processes. Competitive advantage is in speed and quality of execution and deployment, not proprietary information. Besides, in the knowledge economy, most proprietary data is already in the public domain. New benchmarkers are always astonished and humbled by the willingness of practitioners to share. It is remarkable how willing people, especially those involved in the quality movement, are to share their success stories. They are proud of what they do. The third barrier is arrogance. We are the best. Why benchmark? Well, how do you know? The real question is, how do you know you are so good if you never compare your processes to those of others? Fourth is a trap that lies in wait for all of us. The trap of benchmarking that which is convenient, but may be unimportant. Knowing what to benchmark is at least as important as knowing how to benchmark. Every organization has those few things it must do well in order to compete and thrive, its core competencies. These are the key processes that contribute most strongly to customer satisfaction and quality assurance in both the short and the long term. The fifth barrier is impatience. Action always has more appeal than planning. Do something, anything. As a result, benchmarking too often consists of industrial tourism. On any given day, hundreds of groups of managers are walking through someone else's plant or office, asking questions as they occur to them, expressing delight and appreciation of what they see. Interesting? Yes. Entertaining? Almost always. Productive? Only if you are lucky. Industrial tourism is a far cry from the deep analytical work that needs to be done to really adapt and adopt the best practices to your situation. It takes time to do it well. Without proper preparation, your benchmarking project will result in frustrated people and lackluster results. The final barrier is the failure to obtain senior management support. Without at least one advocate, someone to run interference and rally their colleagues, management will be skeptical, probably apprehensive, and possibly hostile to anyone assessing their operations, much less proposing to change them. But without question, the biggest barrier is not doing it at all. We have heard all of the excuses. We are too small. We are too busy. We are different. No one does what we do. We do it better than anyone else. Accelerating the rate of improvement is the key competitive issue facing all of our organizations. Benchmarking is a tool that can expose the need for change, quantify the magnitude of the improvements that are needed, and it can model examples of how these improvements can be done. Benchmarking can enable the quantum leaps we all need to survive in the new global economy. Let me leave you with a final thought about both the new economy and the importance of benchmarking in this brave new economic world. It comes from the late Eric Hoffer, who wrote, "In time of drastic change, it is the learners who inherit the future. The learned find themselves equipped to live in a world that no longer exists. Those organizations that do not join with their peers in the sharing of performance data will find that they are not learning organizations and that they are living and dying in a world that no longer exists.
Thank you, Mr. Finnigan. We congratulate you on a wonderful conference. We come back to our question and answers section by telephone and fax. You can send us your questions. We will first reach one by fax from Quito, Ecuador. And it reads, how do we achieve disclosure of the other company when there is no trust between the companies yet?
Well, with great difficulty. I don't know how to answer that other than to say that you have to go about the process of establishing that trust. And the way to do that, I think, is probably, as I said earlier, is go out and partner with organizations who will not be hostile, who are open to it. And on the basis of the experience that you have with another organization, go back and approach those people you originally wanted to go to. But without trust, the process doesn't work.
We have another question from Guayaquil. How can you apply benchmarking in a company that is leader if its competition is less and it has more of a quick answer in the schema of business?
Let me see if I understood the question. How can you do benchmarking in an organization that has a sense of knowing only what it wants to do? The answer to that is, again, in the process, that the process consists of establishing relationships with organizations who perform processes similar to yourself, developing the relationship through the exchange of information, doing the analysis of that data and incorporating it into your own operations. Hopefully that answers the question.
Vamos a dar cabida a las llamadas telefónicas y
we'll answer one of the telephone lines
la Universidad Tecnológica de
from Netzahualcoyotl in Mexico. In an institution
de reciente creación, ¿cuál sería la estrategia o las estrategias para una pronta y efectiva aplicación de los principios de benchmarking?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question at all. I'm not hearing the question.
For a newly created higher education, what is the process for establishing benchmarking and its principles? He's referring to a higher education institution, newly created.
That's an interesting question. What I thought I heard was how, because there's two ways I could interpret the question, and let me answer them both. One is the use of benchmarking in higher education as a tool for improving the processes of higher education. The second is incorporating benchmarking into the curriculum of an institution. There are several universities that I'm aware of in the United States that have begun to incorporate benchmarking in an instructive sense in the curriculum of the school. University of Chicago, Oregon State are two that quickly come to mind. And as part of that total quality curriculum that's being adopted, benchmarking is a part of it. As I mentioned earlier, I think if you want to have a very comprehensive total quality effort, benchmarking is a very reliable means of providing the focus for continuous improvement. The second is whether a university can use benchmarking or total quality for that matter to improve their own operations? And the answer to that is yes. And and I think most universities have a very good history of cooperating with one another in the sharing of information. But it hasn't been done in the very structured way that benchmarking suggests. But there are institutions that are doing that. There is a lot of benchmarking taking place in the United States and at the secondary school level, and I think it can be a helpful tool for all of education.
The next question comes by phone from the National Institute of Training in Fiscal Training in Querétaro. Good morning. We want to ask Mr. Finnigan the relationship between benchmarking con el network marketing or multiple marketing. Is there a group in Mexico which provides consultation on benchmarking?
Good question. There are two things that I could suggest. First of all, directly answer your question. I don't have the title of the organization right in front of me, but in Monterrey, there is what I think it's called the Productivity Institute, is in fact attempting to establish some cooperation among organizations in Mexico for the purposes of benchmarking. Call that a network, if you will. The other thing that I could suggest is that you contact the Center for Quality and Productivity in Houston, Texas, which is attempting to establish in the United States a national and an international clearinghouse for benchmarking, and that is where the Monterrey group is participating. And I apologize, I don't have the name right off the top of my head, but if you were to write to the center, I think I could provide that information to you through the center. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much. We have another call from the Technological Institute of Telephones in Mexico, Monterrey. The question is, what relationship is there between benchmarking with the addition, mission, objectives, goals, politics, and procedures of an organization?
Good question. The relationship is, in an ideal sense, is that the benchmarking data provides the market-based facts that can be used to establish goals and be therefore part of the goal-setting process of an organization. In my own and in many other companies now, benchmarking is used as the base point for establishing our operating goals for a given year. So, as an example, rather than simply establishing a unit manufacturing cost for a product or a continuous improvement goal for unit manufacturing costs, we do that based upon information from the marketplace coming from our benchmarking studies, both with competitors and with other kinds of partners. And in the optimal use of benchmarking, that's the way it's used, I believe. It's used to establish goals for short and long term for an organization. In other words, your goal-setting process, your management processes should comprehend the benchmarking tool.
Gracias.
Thank you. The Technological Institute in Toluca has another question for this.
Toluca, ¿nos escucha? Parece que hay alguna confusión en la línea. Vamos a dar respuesta a una
We shall answer another question.
Fax de la Baja
The
California
fax from La Paz in Mexico.
Dice, ¿qué tipo de convenio
What type of agreement is necessary so that companies involved in benchmarking allow the disclosure of their operation to their competitors?
Well, that's a good question. There are two parts to that. The first one is, if you enter into a benchmarking arrangement with your competitor, then in fact that's the agreement that you are going to share information. And benchmarking with competitors is very common. The second is comes back to that trust issue when you benchmark either through a consultant or with a non-competitive organization. The presumption is that that information is only used by the partner and is not passed on to a competitor without your understanding. And if that gets violated, then in fact you would not benchmark with that organization again.
Desde Orizaba, México,
From Orizaba, Mexico, the Technological Institute asks, in what measure does benchmarking limit creativity in reaching performance levels higher than the standards?
I don't believe it limits creativity at all, just the reverse. I think it provides the opportunity for organizations to have a real clear sense based upon market reality of what they have to accomplish, and where they're able to use the information alone for that, that's fine. But where they're able to take that same data and apply that additional creativity of the organization, then no, creativity is a very, very big part of what this is all about, looking for those breakthroughs that I spoke of.
Desde Guayaquil, la siguiente
From
pregunta,
Guayaquil,
¿cuál es la relación entre el benchmarking
what is the relationship
ISO 9000?
between benchmarking
ISO.
and Standards 9000?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Since Standards 9000 is again a quality-based set of requirements, the relationship once more, I think, is being able to find in the marketplace the very best practices that an organization can incorporate in order to meet the requirements of 9000. Said another way, you can go out and search organizations that do similar processes to you who have already met the 9000 standards, and then work with those organizations to find out what did they do to get there.
Tenemos otro fax.
We have another fax from Mérida.
De Itelmex. Dice, al abatir los márgenes de competencia,
When you reduce
no se
costs
perderá o no se
from the
producirá un monopolio de
by reducing competitive margins, will there not be, as a result, a monopoly in the service companies?
If I understand that, by reducing costs, would there be a monopoly? Would suggest that by reducing costs, eventually nobody could compete. As long as it seems to me that the market is free, as long as the market is free to let the customer determine what they want and how they want to receive such services, I think there will always be competitors there. One of the reasons that many of us are involved with benchmarking and are using it so aggressively is that we're dealing in all of our areas with competitors who didn't exist 5 years ago. So I think there's always going to be people coming into the marketplace with a better idea, and what benchmarking helps us do is try to stay abreast with that new competition.
Continuamos recibiendo llamadas telefónicas y ustedes también, si quieren hacer las preguntas directamente o por medio del fax. Con mucho
If you want to make questions by phone or fax, we can include them in our program. From the Technological Institute in Orizaba, the concept and the practice of total quality do not include in themselves benchmarking, making by including total quality. Would that be doubling the functions if you include benchmarking?
Let me repeat what I think the question was. The question being, do you in fact double the workload by including benchmarking in a total quality effort? The answer to that is benchmarking is not free. It is going to take some commitment of time, both in training as well as in the management of the process itself. And in that sense, yes, it's incremental to the people, to the organizations that are involved with total quality. But again, I would argue that it is a good investment because it assures that your total quality efforts are focused on the right things.
Gracias. Otra llamada viene de Mérida, Yucatán, del Instituto Tecnológico de Teléfonos. Adelante.
Sí, buenos días. La pregunta es la siguiente.
The next
¿Cómo
question.
puede aplicarse
How can you apply benchmarking in companies like telephone company in Mexico, where we do not have any competitors?
The issue of competitor is not the point. Within your organization, I am certain that there are a number of work processes that you could find in other organizations outside your industry, both in the public and private sector, who in fact may be more efficient than you at those work processes. I mentioned a few a short time ago. Billing systems. You have a billing system in the telephone company. Well, so does Procter & Gamble of Mexico. So does Xerox of Mexico. You have service representatives who go out to do repairs. Well, so does the Xerox Corporation, so does IBM, so does Hewlett-Packard. So I think if you were to just simply take a look at your organization and say, where are areas where we think that there is opportunity for us to improve the process and maybe capture some improvements in overhead expenses, etc., you would find your way, find a good place to start towards identifying partners for benchmarking outside of your industry.
Gracias. Otra pregunta.
Thank you very much. Another question from the Technological Institute in Toluca.
Dice, algunos expertos
Some experts in total quality, like Dr. Deming, do not accept benchmarking. Rather, they promote continuous improvement as a positive result even for a country. How can you establish the process on an individual basis?
Well, I hear two questions in there. Let me take the first one. The first one is relative to Deming's concept of continuous improvement and what is a relationship to benchmarking. I hope I have already answered that. That basically says that benchmarking can become the tool for identifying what the proper objectives and goals ought to be for your continuous improvement effort. And I believe that Dr. Deming would applaud that. The second part of the question was really, I think, what I heard was related to not as part of total quality, but I'm sorry, do you have it? I think I forgot.
Sí, dice, debe ejecutarse el benchmarking por las empresas.
Must benchmarking be implemented on an individual basis?
Again, individual basis. I'm not sure exactly what that means. Benchmarking can be implemented by an individual organization, but implemented by an individual work group, and even an individual manager. The first benchmarking study I ever did was done unilaterally by myself. So in that sense, you can start individually. You can't, as I mentioned earlier, you can certainly go to the library and research another organization strictly on the basis of paperwork. But generally speaking, benchmarking is really going to require a partnership, a face-to-face meeting with one or more organizations.
Muchas gracias, señor Finnigan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Finnigan. We are very grateful for your interest and participation to all our audience in Ecuador, Mexico, Peru, and Paraguay. We hope that this conference has been informative and of value to all of you. The International Training Center will continue transmitting more programs in our series, Administration and Senior Management for the 21st Century. Later on, we'll send you further information on our next conference that will transmit on January 27, 1994. We invite you to participate. Thank you.